Let me ask you something. Do you hate small talk? Or do you feel awkward around strangers? Does your mind ever go blank during conversations? And do you feel anxious just about to enter a new party where you know nobody there? Or if the conversation started with a stranger, are you afraid that you might be boring? Or do you overthink everything that you said? If that's you, then you're on the right video. And all of these things happened to me. As an introvert, I hated small talk and starting conversations with people I don't know. But eventually, I learned to overcome my social anxiety. And this became an essential life skill that helped me to excel in my professional and personal lives. So in this video, I want to share with you all the things that I learned to help you overcome your own social anxiety so that you can speak to anyone and become effortless in any conversation. Let's get something out of the way here is that you're not born socially awkward. This is something that I've seen change so much in the last 10 years, but especially communication has changed a lot. It wasn't that social skills were easier back in the day. It's just that we were doing a lot more of it face to face. Now, once digital tech took off, so many of us are now spending hours and hours in front of screens and virtually communicating with each other. So we're losing all these natural things that we can learn from by being in person, like body language, eye contact, nonverbal cues, right? You can't see these things when you're virtually calling someone. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many of us are losing touch of this real essential life skill. And this is the reason why loneliness is now an epidemic, even though we're more digitally connected than ever before. We're sending direct messages, we're sending emojis to each other. But are we really having a real world conversation? Even in places that we work, where we're spending time with our colleagues that we see every single day. A lot of those days now spent over on Zoom and also on Microsoft Teams. So it's harder and harder ever to find that opportunity to practice real world human connection. And as anything in life, to get better at this, you need to practice it. But if we never get the chance to practice, how are we ever going to get better at it? And I want you to know that you're not alone. I definitely felt this way. I'm actually a really introverted person, and I'm learning how to talk now since having a baby during the pandemic. At the time, I was more locked in than most new moms, which is lonely even in normal times, but especially during that period. Without much practice for that whole entire year, when I came out of it, I got nervous. I started tripping over my words and thinking over everything I said and being nervous in new social situations. But this one belief really helped me, is that we're not born socially awkward. And you're definitely not. As humans, we need connections to feel happy. We're social creatures by nature, as we always have been. To talk to anyone and to get really good at it, you just have to talk to more people. So I took every opportunity to chat to people in my daily lives, even my Amazon delivery driver. So in the rest of this video, I'm going to share with you some tips on how you can make conversations more interesting and more effortless as you go about your daily lives. And I think that you find that this is such an essential life skill to help you build a strong foundation and relationships for your work and personal lives. I want to mention a really important foundation here before we start working in any tips for conversations or social skills, is that we have to start working on ourselves first, which is our self-worth and connection. Because as human beings, to connect better with others, especially in conversations, we have to first work on our own self-worth. And your self-worth is your internal sense of you being worthy of love and connection. And it means that you have value as a person in this world. It's hard. I struggle with self-worth for the longest time. And I find that the self-worth that I have, it really shifts with what I'm going through in life at that moment. And I'm sure that you felt the same way with what you're going through. If you value yourself when things are going well, it changes how you show up with people, right? And how you speak to them. But one thing I really want you to remember is that your self-worth doesn't depend on someone else's opinion of you. But if you have low self-worth like I did, you will always question yourself. Did I say the wrong thing? Or did I tell them too much? Once I realized that I needed to improve my own self-worth, it really improved my confidence, how I show up at social settings. And I really think the best way to build your self-worth is by spending time on yourself. So for me, what really helped me was doing meditation, journaling, spending time in silence, and also doing therapy to find out more about myself. And once you study your self-worth and what your value is as a person in this world, it will change everything about the way that you show up going forward in any conversation and how you talk to anyone. So the secret really how it can be effortless in any conversation going forward, and this is going to take up so much weight off your shoulders, is by being a great listener. If there's anything you take away from this video, I want it to be this one. Because I think a lot of times when we go into a conversation, we have so much anxiety and stress about what to say next. How do we become more clever, more interesting in front of that person? Because we all have this nature as humans, right? To be liked. But the most important factor to keep any conversation going and to keep it going really, really well is actually by being a great active listener. We live in this world where we're surrounded by so much distraction. We have devices pinging away in our pockets. We have things going on in our natural surrounding environment. And the ability to focus solely on that person, to give them your attention and your time, which can be so valuable to most people in this very moment, is the most important skill that you can ever have. You know how sometimes you go into a room and you go and speak to someone, you can really feel that person's energy straight away. You can feel whether or not they're there for the right reasons or the fact that they even want to speak to you. You know what I mean, right? And this is why the other person can feel the exact thing about you. We should really approach every single person that we meet, if we want to speak to them, with a genuine interest to want to know more about them and to want to be in that conversation with them. Because that energy, that vibe, it really shows. Let's say you show up with a really negative vibe and you don't want to be there, you just feel very anxious and want to run away. The other person can definitely feel that too. And that's going to affect your conversation. And one thing that I always keep in the back of my head when I'm about to approach someone is I think to myself, what can I learn from this person today? Now that one question really puts myself in the right mindset of being in that interested mindset of finding out more about that person rather than thinking about what I want to say to them or how I want to portray myself. And this is something that I noticed in insanely likable people, which I'm sure you encounter in your past life or who you spoke to in the past, is the people that really makes you feel so good after leaving that conversation. They're not trying to be the most interesting person in that room, but instead, they make you feel like the most interesting person in that room. So now in conversations, because I'm more relaxed, I forget about all the stress of trying to be clever and trying to be interesting. I just now sit back and I listen to what they have to say. I became really good at listening to the other person. And to keep the conversation going, I would then ask back some open-ended questions to find out more about what that person has said. Let's say someone tells me about their most recent trip from their vacation. Then I would say, oh, that's so interesting. Tell me more about some of the favorite places that you saw on your trip. So again, so that opens up to more information. So you're really kind of digging away at more and more information from that conversation as you're expanding on the back of what they said. So you see how you didn't pressure yourself to think about what to say, but rather you're just asking more questions because you have a real interest in that person. So with questions, really try to start with the open-ended questions. So questions that has what or why at the start of it, rather than questions that basically end up with yes or no as the answers. Because those questions are closed, really doesn't help you very much to get you more information. And a really great way to think about this is, let's say, for example, I asked, what do you like about your job? Versus, do you like your job? You see how those can give you very different answers. And you can then work on the back of that to create even more conversation to keep that going and to really find out more about that person as well. And when you start to practice this more and more and really getting better at asking better questions that are open-ended to lead to more information, you just literally finding out more and more around this person about who they are, what they're interested in. And that's really a great way to build that meaningful connection that eventually can strengthen the relationship. Let's say this person is someone you just met at work, or maybe someone that you met at a networking event or a new friend, right? If it's a new friend, that can grow into a much more deeper friendship because now you know so much more about this person. Okay, so let's now talk about awkward silences. And for me, that was for the longest time my biggest fears. I just feel like that awkward silence feels like it goes on forever. In your head, it feels like it's really long, right? But in reality, it's probably just a few seconds. But for me, it's always, how do I navigate around those awkward silences to keep the conversation going or to keep things interesting? So first of all, don't even overthink it, because The other person, they may or may not even realize that it's happening. Sometimes I feel like we have this spotlight on ourselves all the time, thinking that the worst things are happening, especially when we're in a very new social situation. But in reality, it may not even be such a big deal. Now, second of all, if that's really happening to you right now and you want to address that awkward silence, think about how you can shift the conversation. Maybe look at the other person, notice something about them, and come up with some kind of compliment to shift the conversation away somewhere else. So it could be like, oh, I like your watch. Where'd you get it from? Or why you chose that brand? Or maybe think about something that both of you are going through right now in your current location. It could be the venue. Maybe it could be the music choice. It could be like, well, I really hate this music they're playing in the background. And what do you think? Or, another example, like, what would you like to listen to? If they say no, they don't like it either. So you finding some kind of common ground where you can speak about that topic, shifting the tension away. And now you move the direction of the conversation somewhere else and making it much more of a common interest that you can share about. And one thing that I found to be really useful, especially on days where I wasn't in a good mood or something bad happened that day, I wasn't in the right mindset. And I think at that moment, if I come to be honest about it with the other person and open up about that and becoming vulnerable, that usually opens up the other person as well. And we end up having some much more deeper conversation because of it. Because really that gives us something to connect to. And the other person maybe had a bad day or has similar experience in the past, and we can share something about that. By the way, I just want to mention something here to clear the air is that conversations are not meant to go on forever. And I used to think that I've lost that social skill by not being able to keep a conversation going on and on. But conversations are meant to have a start, a middle, and then eventually finish. And when you have extremely long pause or an awkward silence that you feel like it's coming towards the end of something, you can use this as opportunity to wrap the conversation up and move on to another conversation. So if you need a break, you can say things like, well, I'm really glad that we met. Thank you so much for sharing your story and looking forward to seeing you again. Or you can say things like, it's been great chatting with you. Whichever way that you want to end the conversation on a natural note. And I find that to be a really great way to exit the conversation gracefully. But also now you can move on to someone else where you can have another conversation with. So really it's about kind of judging how that awkward silence with a pause is coming to and how you personally feel as well. I'm sure you feel about this too, is that after the conversation ends, you don't always remember what you said in the conversation or the other person said. But what you do remember is how that other person made you feel. So let's say you went to an event and afterwards you probably said to yourself, I really felt energized by speaking to that guy, John. And the same way, this is how the other person will remember you as well. But if someone was constantly checking their phone or interrupting you or forgetting your name or just looking around the room for other people to speak to, that probably makes you feel horrible too, right? And just the same way where we don't do the same to others is that we want to leave a great impression of how they felt when they were speaking to you. So you can lose that pressure of feeling like you have to have the most interesting thing to say or that you might have stumbled over your words. All of these are fine because no one's going to remember exactly what you said in the conversation, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. So if you're showing up with the right energy, the right mindset, you listen actively to the other person, and you show genuine interest in that person and what they have to say, that's all it takes to make them feel great. And with that great result, you'll be remembered for it. So let's now put it all together of everything we mentioned in this video. How do you create an art of conversation that becomes effortless? So think of the conversation as like you exploring a new city, especially when it comes to meeting new strangers for the very first time. So at the start of the conversation, you're choosing a starting point, right? This is like when you travel to a new place, a new city, you're finding a new landmark or a place of interest that you want to start exploring first. And this could be where you're picking that common ground of starting a conversation, right? It could be where you're at, maybe the venue you're at, both of you, what you're seeing together, or it could be something about that person that you can talk about, compliment them on something, or something unusual that you've seen, or something great that they've done, if they're a presenter or they have spoken before that. So whatever it is, find something where you can have a starting point to really start drawing out more information from that other person. And then as you're exploring this new city, you probably would be looking for directions because you're probably lost, right? Imagine right now you don't have your Google Maps or your map app with you on your phone. How would you ask the questions to find out where you're going? And this is exactly the same as in the conversation. You're asking open-ended questions of trying to draw out more information from what that person has shared. And as you're traveling through this new place, this new city, you're discovering hidden gems, right? Things like hole in the walls or special bars that no one heard of, or a special little place that's off the beaten path. And this is where the open-ended questions can find those gems for you as you're asking for that in your conversation. So you're slowly chipping away at the information that the other person's giving you to eventually form a much better picture that's interesting to you about them. This is really where you can find those interesting and common topics by being an active listener in that conversation. And if you travel a lot, you probably know this happens a lot, is that you're bound to get lost, right? And this is part of the art of conversation as well, is that you're going to come to these awkward silences or dead ends in the conversation where you have to think about unexpected ways to turn that around or to add more interesting topics into it. So like I said earlier about awkward silences, is how do you turn that moment by shifting away that topic? Maybe focusing on what they're currently wearing or what they currently have that's interesting about them and asking them questions about that. Or it could be something about the common place that you're both at. Can you shift the topic away to something else? And then once you stop getting lost, it's about finding your way back. Is there a way for you to find another direction in the conversation? Or maybe even try to wrap the conversation up if it's coming towards an end. So you see how I think in my mind, exploring a new city is like finding out about a new person during the conversation. How do you use these different ways to make the conversation flow naturally, to become effortless because you yourself are becoming that active listener that really puts the other person as the focus of the conversation. And the other person will feel heard and having that much more deeper connection with you because of that. And eventually, the well-traveled cities and the places that you know really well, that you're familiar with, they become your friends. And you start building a much more deeper friendship with them over time. And think of the strangers that you meet along the way as the really exciting new places that you've never been to. And you're curious and you're interested to find out more about them. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. I'm really, really glad that you're here and you learned from this video about how to speak to people better and how to build this essential life skill. But it's like driving a car. By watching a video on it, it might help you a little bit in that foundational knowledge, but really where the real experience comes in is when you're driving in unpredictable road conditions or weather conditions outside. And how do you navigate around that and learning from it? So I really invite you to go out in the next 30 days to try this out as much as possible with those that you meet in your daily lives. And I'd love to know how you get on. Practice this life skill in your everyday conversations with people, even if that's your mailman or your Amazon delivery person. And if you want to learn more life skills in other areas, please check out these videos here. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.